Welcome to episode 3 of the Real Estate Investing Advisors podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we are in our home studio. Well, okay, it's not really a studio, but it is our home. And you'll see us in some different locations over time. But today we are at home. So if you are watching this on YouTube, we do apologize if you see some furry friends cross the screen or if you hear our dog Diggy cough because he is sitting by our feet. So we do apologize. And we are going to talk about the differences between buying a house and a condo or buying a house versus a condo. And I'm going to let Michael describe that a little bit more.
I would get Debbie's clients ask me, Michael, should I buy a house or a condo? And a lot of times it's for ROI, which is return on investment. And we're going to talk about ROI in the next podcast. What we're going to talk about with the house versus condo here are the differences structurally, financially, that really help that person make the decision what's going to be right. A lot of people come down from markets where they have a house and they live in a house. So they're familiar with those costs and they're not really familiar with the condo costs. So Debbie gets this question. And, when they ask you specifically, Debbie, like, should I buy a house or a condo? What is your default go-to answers?
My default really turns the question back onto my clients as far as what's your lifestyle? And a lot of times people say to me, I want to buy my retirement home and we're going to retire in 5, 10, 15 years, whatever that number is. And I ask them and I look at them and I ask, do you really know where you want to retire in 10 years, whatever the number is? Or do you really know what type of property you want to be in when you retire? And most of the time they don't. And so I think the pandemic really changed a lot of things for a lot of people. And I reiterate to them, purchase something that fits your lifestyle today. Don't worry about 10 years. A lot of my clients will trade up, they'll buy something today, sell it, trade up to something, and then really buy what they want to retire in. And so what's your lifestyle? Do you like to golf, play pickleball, tennis, walk, bike, paddleboard? Or a big, really determining factor, what's your budget? Your budget really is going to determine a lot about location and then the size of the property. And so on my initial buyer consultation, these are the kind of questions that I ask and I delve into to really help educate people to really understand what the differences are. Now, anytime on this podcast we talk about real estate, let me remind everybody, we are talking about our local market. So if you have these questions and you're in a different market, happy to reach out and find an agent for you to talk to because every state's going to be different with laws. So real estate here, there's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad answer. It's really about your lifestyle.
It's choice. And that's also where I have to answer questions based on how they intend to use the property as a vacation home or a second home. I came into the mix when they were going to rent it. So Debbie had clients that weren't going to rent the property. They didn't inquire with me about these specifics. But when you decide you're going to rent the property, you have to make determinations as to how you're going to use it. So she was talking about pickleball and, the different things. If you're going to kayak, stand up and paddle, et cetera, and you have things you want to leave here, you then have to look at the options that you'll have. Condos typically don't have a lot of storage area. If you have a house, you may have a garage or a separate area on the property that would be a storage bin where you could lock away your stand-up paddle or kayaks, or we had some owners that left golf clubs, and the list goes on. With a house, you typically will have more storage, the ability to leave those things behind, maybe put bikes up on a wall and lock them, but you don't have those options typically in a condo. So sometimes that would change somebody's decision as to what they were actually going to purchase because they wanted to either have a lot of gear here or it didn't matter for some clients. But the one that really changed things are when clients would decide we're going to fly in, so we'd like to leave as much as possible. And that would change what they would look at. So I didn't even mention townhome, but that acts more like a condo in most circumstances with storage. So that particular question comes to me. It's definitely different. I'll talk a little bit about the maintenance side of things, but I think it's more important from Debbie's perspective to explain things such as like the HOA and the differences in costs, because from a distance, it may seem like a house isn't as expensive And it's really truly because what Debbie's going to explain about what's included in the fees for a condo.
That's correct. So your HOA fees, if you're in a single family home currently and you're in a neighborhood, you're certainly familiar with HOA fees where those cover maintenance for the common areas. If you have a community pool or maybe there's a security and so anything common area, very similar to where you're living, that's where what your HOA fees cover. In a condo, it's totally different. Again, I don't know if all states are like this, but this is how it is here in our area. A condo fee includes maintenance and insurance for the exterior of the building. Those are two big numbers. And especially with insurance costs that have gone up that we'll touch on a little bit later in the podcast. But keep in mind, they also include all of your utilities. So water, sewer, trash, basic cable, internet, electric you are responsible for. And actually trash is included in our taxes, but we kind of lump it in there. So even though a condo fee may be $1,200 a quarter versus $500 a quarter, you really have to look at what's included. So when you really break out the numbers, it's probably pretty close. Now, I want to mention in a condo, with the collapse of the South Florida condo building, new laws have been put into place, which I really think is a good thing. Over the years, condo fees have been kept historically low, and then they would assess owners for maintenance costs. Well, now what's happening is condo associations are having to play catch up. And so any particular maintenance items that are coming due, let's say a roof needs to be replaced and there's not enough reserves, guess what? Homeowners or the condo owners are being assessed for that roof. So however many owners are in the building, divided up by the total cost, and now they've got to write a check. Some condos will they finance it and you pay monthly. It's just always be aware that, to have your agent double check with the HOA if there is any assessments coming up. The other thing that both home associations have and condo associations are something called a new buyer fee. And what this does is this really helps the associations to raise money. And it does go back into the pot where it goes towards whatever the money is allocated for. So be aware of that. Some communities, it could be $250 or $1,200. Other communities, some of these planned developments, like Rosemary, Watercolor, Water Sound, and some of the bigger developments, it's a percentage. And so it could be 0.5% of the purchase price. So just be aware of these. Property managers don't like surprises. Real estate agents, we don't like surprises. And I sure as heck don't want my clients getting surprises, especially when it comes to money. You really want to know what your costs are.
Yeah. And with the costs, Debbie had mentioned $1,200 versus $500. And what she's alluding to is, it may seem like the condo is more expensive because it's $1,200 per period and a house is only $500 per period similarly. But the house, you have to then add back in all those things that are included in the condo's fees. Something else to consider is whether you're going to have this managed or you're going to self-manage the property. If it's a vacation rental, there is the factor that with the condos, there's typically another layer outside of your property manager that people will walk the property. I, as a property manager, meaning like vacation rental property manager, would get phone calls from the condo association property manager. And they would say, hey, Michael, you've got a guest parked in the wrong spot. You've got this, that, the other thing. On a daily basis, they were out there watching things, checking things out, taking note of what's broken, damage needs to be improved. And a lot of those things are, then appropriated for costs that come out of the kitty from that higher dollar amount, right? So these are things to consider. But if you're doing it from a distance, condos typically tend to be a little bit easier in some cases because you have that extra set of eyeballs almost daily on the property. Whereas if you have a house, it's up to your property manager, or if you're remote, just your Ring doorbell to see what's actually going on around the property itself.
And there are companies or individuals that, if you're not renting your property, that do take care of a property for you. So that's something to consider too if you're not here. During off season, when we had our company, we would have employees go in at least twice a month just walk the property, make sure there's no leaks, flush toilets, that sort of thing. So it's never a bad idea to have somebody and have boots on the ground.
That we included. A lot of the property management companies don't. They consider that add-ons, and it's technically called Home Watch. So there's a Home Watch association that exists nationwide. Some of these local companies here on 30A in the region belong to that association, but the terminology is more Home Watch, but that's their entire job is to just go into properties that aren't on rental programs and look for these things that could be problematic.
And that's a really good point. In another podcast, we will go into the ins and outs of property management companies and kind of what to look for. Every company runs their business differently. Every company includes different things in their management fee. So just know that'll be coming down the line. Now, as far as insurance, we are going to interview an expert again at a later date. I just want to touch on some basics of insurance because it's ever changing, and some things we talk about today, tomorrow that could change. Now, again, with a condo, your condo fee includes insurance for the building. In a house, you're going and just getting a policy. Now, in a condo, you want contents insurance. And so that would cover you from the sheetrock in. If something happened, then your insurance would kick in. So if you had to come in and redo your kitchen, or like if something happened and your unit flooded, let's say, you would have insurance, again, sheetrock in, furniture, appliances, kitchen, fixtures, that sort of thing. If the building had to be rebuilt, then the condo is responsible for the exterior and rebuilding. Now, for a home, it's just like your personal home. The insurance covers the structure and the interior. Some of the things to look out for if you're purchasing a home: what's the age of the house, the age of the roof, the age of the hot water heater. You would want to have what's called a wind mitigation report, which tells the insurance company how a roof is attached to the house. And then also something called a 4-point inspection. And that talks about all the mechanicals in the home. Now, if you're buying a brand new home, these reports you do not need. It's just the older homes. And so these are just a few things to look out for if you're buying a condo. It's also similar. What's the age of the roof, the age of the building? And so, again, there's so many ins and outs of insurance that just know you can get insurance. Insurance policies and insurance premiums, have gone up, but you can get insurance.
I'll jump over to some maintenance that you may or may not have thought about before. And I know some of the homeowners or condo owners especially weren't prepared for, that Debbie has, talked through with them, and you have to advise them, is the fact that when there are things to be done, whether I'm talking about condos, if there's a roof problem, exterior, et cetera, parking lot, you name it, they don't always choose the best times of the year based on your rental calendar to get these things fixed. So they might start tearing off the roof right in the middle of spring break. They may block. So the long and short of it is you don't have control typically of when these repairs to the condos will get done. And it has been intrusive. There's been some circumstances where large tranches of the rental season were missed because these decisions have to be made based on contractors. It's not always based off of what the rental calendars look like for those who actually rent their properties out.
Most of the time, though, most work is done in the fall into winter. We did have situations through our, again, almost 10 years of having the rental company where us and the owners are scratching our heads like, what are they thinking? Why are they doing this in the middle of spring break? So be aware of it, but don't let that scare you away, because if a condo is right for your lifestyle, then don't let that be an issue.
We ran the rental company for almost a decade. And out of that, there was maybe a handful of instances where the timing was not perfect. I just thought I would bring it up because when it wasn't perfect, it was a surprise to the owner. It was a surprise to the management companies, not just ours, of anyone that rented in that particular area. It's just something to consider, that you can't control that part of it. In a house, obviously, you can control when maintenance gets done.
We don't like surprises. Okay, I like certain surprises, but not surprises like that. Those were never fun surprises for anybody.
Yeah. So speaking of surprises, for some people, the furnishings of the property are quite a surprise. This is one of those that I always laugh about, which is why as soon as I turned the page, I started smiling, because Debbie's going to go into this in a second. But basically, a lot of these vacation rentals are already furnished. And before Debbie gets into furnishings, I will say that from my perspective as a vacation rental company is don't change things if it's already booked for the season, because the people who booked it based on what they saw in the photos, right? So there may have been a lazy boy chair and they booked it for a reason for that. You would think that some things wouldn't matter. And, Debbie will explain that, if you replace a king bed with a nicer king bed, not a big deal, but you do not want to be ripping out bunks and putting in a queen. Surprise, surprise to the renters that come with 4 kids.
Yeah, that's a problem. We did have situations like that. And the guests would show up and ask Michael, what happened to the bunk beds? And he goes, well, what do you mean? There's 2 sets of bunk beds. Well, the owner was here that week prior, didn't tell us, changed out the beds. And now we have an angry guest because they have nowhere for their kids to sleep. So be aware of that. And then I always say to my clients, you may not like the furniture. So if you buy, let's say April, May, the property's rented through season and they just hate the furniture, it's okay. Just go through season. You're probably not going to stay there anyway if it is rented. So go through season, get some income, and then in the fall and winter time, work on refurnishing and redecorating. And the next podcast is the ROI. Podcast number 5, we're going to talk about some design tips and tricks, and that will also help your return on investment. So just know 99.9% of the properties, whether it is a house or a condo, is sold furnished and rental ready. And just go with it. Just go with it. It's going to make your life easier. You're not going to have to stress. You're not going to have to worry about fully furnishing an entire home or condo, and then just change things over time.
And thankfully, we have a market in this market where it's seasonal. So you'll have people that don't really start booking for spring break and summer until late fall, December, January. So the owners that do make the changes do it after the summer burst, in that fall before winter timeframe, so you can get new photos and advertise the property the way it's going to be the following year.
Well, that's all that's on our notes for today's show. And we really appreciate everybody listening in and watching if you're watching YouTube. And till next time.
Yes. Next one's going to be on ROI, return on investment.